Since well before Victor Hugo looked up at Notre Dame and thought, what if a hunchback lived in there? Authors have been inspired by Paris. The Storytime in Paris podcast will help keep this tradition alive with interviews and readings from your favorite contemporary authors with a French connection. Every episode features 5 questions asked by you, our author's biggest fans, and answered live on air. Then our authors will treat us to a reading of an excerpt from their book. Who knows? Maybe you'll even be inspired to write your own great French novel. I'm your host, Jennifer Garrity. My guest this week is Linda Lappin, author of Loving Modigliani, The Afterlife of Jeanne Hébuterne. Linda is a prize-winning poet, novelist, travel writer, literary translator, and writing teacher. Her novel, Signatures in Stone, won the 2014 Daphne du Maurier Award for Mystery Writing, and her creative writing book, The Soul of Place, Ideas and Exercises for Conjuring the Genius Loci, won the gold medal in the Nautilus Awards in the field of creativity in 2015. For her work in literary translation, Linda has received the Poggioli Prize from Penn, a Fulbright grant, and 2 National Endowment for the Arts grants. Her latest novel, Loving Modigliani, The Afterlife of Jeanne Hébuterne, begins 48 hours after the death of artist Amedeo Modligliani, as his pregnant common-law wife Jeanne Hébuterne falls from a window to her death. What follows is a story that flows through multiple timelines, blending biography, fiction, mystery, magical realism, and history, as we are guided to remember a woman, a talented artist in her own right, nearly forgotten by time. Please help me welcome Linda Lappin, author of Loving Modigliani, The Afterlife of Jeanne Hébuterne. Hello, Linda. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you. I'm delighted to be a guest today on your very interesting podcast.
Thank you so much. Can you give us a quick little introduction to who you are and your work?
Yes. Well, I'm an American writer living in Rome. I've been living in Europe for the last 40 years. I've always been a writer and a translator, and I've published 4 novels and several books of poetry and a creative writing guide called The Soul of Place. And my most recent novel is Loving Modigliani, The Afterlife of Jeanne Hébuterne.
Can you tell me your connection to France?
Well, I've been living in Europe for quite a long time, but I'd always studied French and French literature when I was in school. And I always thought I would end up in Paris, but instead I ended up in Rome for various reasons. And I loved traveling to Paris and visiting friends there and studying French art. And, I hope to be able to spend more time and longer stays there in the future, too.
Certainly not bad to have ended up in Rome instead of Paris.
Well, it depends. It depends. France is better organized.
Yes.
Italy's cheap. Has been cheaper over the years, but, not so much anymore.
Well, luckily, we're just a quick plane ride away. So
just a quick train ride, too.
Oh, that too. Well, so I've compiled some questions here from your fans and followers.
Oh, good.
The first question is, so your book starts with the death of Jeanne Hébuterne, and it's told from her perspective, which I find to be a bold and unique choice. How did you decide to start your book with her death?
Well, I was originally working on a book about Jeanne Hébuterne, which was a first-person diary sort of thing, starting from when she was 16, which is actually incorporated in the book. But there was a problem because Jeanne dies. And, you can't tell the story of her death when she, and you could up until that moment and then that's it. And what's really interested me about her life is the way that she's been rediscovered as an artist and the way documents and photos and artwork have been released and come out over the last 20, 30 years. And so I wanted to get that part in too. And it just came to me one day that I could start to avoid also having to describe just the tragic circumstances and how gory and terrible and horrible and heartbreaking it was, that if I told the story from the point of view of the ghost, that sort of put all of that more negative stuff at a distance. And then I could just treat it very surreally, which is what I did.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, and that's my next question. Your book is a mixture of a number of different kinds of genres. You've got historical fiction and magical realism and fantasy and mystery and biography and adventure. How were you able to blend all these genres together, and why not just stick with one?
As I said, that's what I was going to do. But once I started on this, it was only going to be a prologue. I thought maybe it would be 10 or 15 pages from the ghost point of view, and just have that at the beginning, and have the rest follow as a kind of straight historic work of historical fiction. And then, but I just got so caught up with it, and there was this mythic pattern that was emerging as a quest, as a fairy tale. And so I just went with that as far as it would go, which of course means that she has to be united with Modigliani near the end. And so that was one timeline that I had already worked out. But it was also important to sort of have her in the real world, her work being discovered in our own times. And so I was writing three different pieces. I was writing the diary, which had got up to the point more or less when they go off to the south of France, where their daughter was born. And then I'd written this part, which was the unnamed narrator in the middle, who is studying instead Ortiz de Zarate, and then discovers that Modigliani lived upstairs and becomes fascinated by his story and by Jeanne as well. And then meets the crazy woman who gives her the diary and the other clues. And so that was like a separate thing. And then I realized that they all belonged together like a triptych, only there was a line that was kind of mythical and fantasy, and then there was a line that was biographical, and then there was a post-biography sort of thing. And I didn't realize how it all fit together until after I finished the section, the middle section, when the unnamed narrator comes into possession of the diary and the bracelet.
Very interesting.
It was fun, I have to say. It was fun, and figuring out how I was going to bring them all together, and having the part where she ends up in the immortal world, but not where she wants to be. She has to be with Modigliani. So
it's fun as a reader too, because it's almost like a jigsaw puzzle where you're trying to put together all the different pieces and the different connections between everything.
Well, that's readers who like to do that, because some readers don't like that. They want just to be inundated by a beautiful story. But in this, you do sort of have to piece it together. Otherwise, it won't make any sense.
Yes, that's true. I want to ask you about the research that you did for this novel, because it seems incredibly well researched, not just about Modigliani and Jeanne, but also Ortiz and Soutine and Gauguin and so many other artists and painters that appear from this time period. Can you talk a little bit about the research that you did, and did you discover anything that particularly surprised you?
Well, I discovered Jeanne Hébuterne by chance, actually, many years ago when I went to the first exhibition that was done of her work, which was in the year 2000. And the curator, who actually later ended up in jail for art fraud, who used to be the leading Modigliani scholar, anyway, had put together this very fascinating show, and it was the first time that her works were being shown in 80 years. So from there, just the catalog of the work and finding very little information and going through Modigliani's biographies, I found some information about her. And I actually also contacted this curator, who was very generous and gave me a lot of material about Jeanne. And the project just sort of stayed around for a while. I did a nonfiction essay about her. And then in the back of my mind, I always had this idea that I wanted to do a novel about her life. And the research was over a very long period, I wrote this novel, I guess I started writing it in 2010, 11, maybe, pieces of it, and then I would come back to it. So, trips to Paris, archives, books about Modigliani, books about the period. I'm actually very fascinated with the artists and writers of the 1920s, and so I had a lot of background in that already with the American writers in Paris, like Jane Heath and other people that I had researched the Little Review. So I had a background of what Paris was like in that era. And so I just, brought all of these things together.
I loved living in that time period, especially through her diary, getting to kind of meet all of these different people who weren't so well known then, but now you hear about them and you're like, oh my goodness, wow. So I love living in that world.
Yes, well, so do I. And it was a great pleasure to be able to do that while I was working on the book.
One of our listeners wanted to know about the daughter of Jeanne and Modigliani's. She was young when her parents died and not living with them. Do you know what happened to her? And did she live to see the well-deserved recognition that her parents later received?
Well, it was a kind of a tragic situation for Jeanne Modigliani because she didn't really ever get much financial benefit from Modigliani's work. Some she did, but not what she should have had. And she struggled for many years because she was raised by Modigliani's sister, who had a very dim view of the life that he had led in Paris, they considered to be too unconventional, and so the story had been so tragic about the death of her parents that the Modigliani family members never revealed very much about Modigliani or Jeanne to her. So she didn't really know very much about her parents. And what she did learn about her parents was often in these memoirs that were published after Modigliani's death, which often were very kind of sensational and always emphasizing, that he was a womanizer and that he drank too much and all of these things. And she really took exception to that. She made her living as at the beginning as a translator from French into Italian. And she started working on a book of her own about the life of Modigliani because she was trying to get information and documents and so on. And this was the main focus of her life for many years, was gathering information. And that's when she came into contact with this curator named Christian Parisot, who assisted her in this. And they were planning to do a whole new biography of Modigliani. And she actually did write 2 books about Modigliani, in which she sort of dismantles this myth of the painter, the debauched, Montparnasse painter. And many of his problems actually were the result of his illness because he had a form of tuberculosis, that he'd had for many, many years. So anyway, but she had many problems herself. She had a marriage and also another long-term relationship with a man to whom she wasn't married. She had 2 daughters, one of whom or I don't know if she's even still alive, had a very serious, some kind of disability. They never had enough money from the works of Modigliani because everything had been taken by Zborowski. And so, so it was hard. And Zborowski, they didn't really do very much for Jeanne, I have to say, when she was a baby. And the Hébuterne family also wouldn't assist her when she was trying to get information. And that was one of the things that was behind the show that I saw back in the year 2000, is that finally, even though Jeanne was no longer alive at that time, and she died in the 80s, the curator, first Parisot, who had taken over the command of the Modigliani archives, had convinced the family, the heirs of her brother, André Hébuterne, to release to the public her drawings and paintings. And so, but she'd had a very, very, very hard struggle in working that deal out, and she didn't live to see it fulfilled.
Oh, that's such a shame.
Yeah. And she also became an alcoholic, and she had some mental health issues as well. But she had a very traumatic childhood.
It's a shame, too, because her mother is always sort of a footnote to Modigliani's story instead of having her own story. And so part of what I like so much about your book is that she's front and center, and oftentimes we're looking from her perspective. So it makes her an actual person. Because all I knew about her, too, was that she had died shortly after Modigliani.
Yeah. Well, there was this general prejudice against Jeanne because she was a kind of reserved person with people that she didn't know. So she didn't open up very much. She didn't talk. So a lot of people thought she was just dumb, that she was beautiful but dumb, but that wasn't the case.
And also quite young.
So they didn't take her into consideration. The biographies often didn't even take her into consideration at all. But she had to have been quite remarkable also in her character, very determined, because, she turned her back on her family and all the bourgeois comfort and to go and live with Modigliani in very, very rough conditions. And she didn't want to go back. That was, she was determined.
And accepting his womanizing ways as well.
And accepting all of those, that was difficult. Yeah.
We'll be right back with Storytime in Paris after a word from our sponsors. And now, back to Storytime in Paris. I want to ask you about the painting, the Holy Family of the Circus. So I loved your descriptions, and I wanted so badly for this to be a real painting. I Googled and Googled and Googled. So this painting is threaded throughout the book. It's a picture of Modigliani and Jeanne and the baby Jeanne. And it kind of acts as a guideline for us throughout this book. Can you explain why you created that painting and why it was so important to do so?
Well, one thing that we do know about Jeanne is that it may be that she retouched in some of Modigliani's paintings. That there are some drawings that were originally attributed to Modigliani, which now it seems were done by Jeanne. They often painted the same subjects in the studio, and she would have a completely different kind of take on it, and he would have another. So there was this kind of collaboration between them that there are traces of, suggestions of. And in this particular case, we also know that Modigliani never painted. We don't have any paintings of Jeanne with their daughter. There are no paintings in which the daughter appears, but he loved to paint children, and we know that he adored his daughter. So it's strange that there's no paintings, no pictures that include their child. And so that's kind of was the starting point. And then the idea that also that if he got fed up with something, if he thought it wasn't successful, he would paint over it, or he would, cut it all up with a knife or whatever. So the idea was he'd started it, and then Jeanne had to finish it because she wanted to give it to her daughter. And but then she didn't live long enough to finish it, so somebody else had to. And we also know that later other artists did finish some of the works that Modigliani left unfinished. They were given to some of his friends that he worked with in the same studios, like Kisling and the others. And so that was a way of sort of bringing them all together and participating in this paint, which is completely imaginary. Of course, it doesn't really exist, but it could exist.
I wish that it did.
It could, yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, it has to disappear at the end because, it's a constant transformation. It's a constant transformation.
Yeah, it evolves throughout the book. There's a real sense of connection in your book between people, whether they're living or past, and also a real sense of fate. Like the moment that Jeanne first sees Modigliani and just knows that he's the person for her, there's this bracelet that turns up at auspicious times and different paintings and people. So my question to you is, do you think that great art and great love are fated to be?
Oh, definitely. Yes, definitely.
And now, Linda will read to us from the first chapter of Loving Modigliani, The Afterlife of Jeanne Hébuterne.
Loving Modigliani, a novel by Linda Lappin, The Afterlife of Jeanne Hébuterne, Part 1. The ringing in my ears ceased with the dull thud of a heavy weight hurled out from a high window, crashing into the courtyard. I blacked out as a wave of pain surged through my body, traveling to the tips of my fingers and the roots of my hair. I'd barely had time to glimpse my brother Andre's face at the window, to hear the neighbor's cat yowling on the balcony below us, or the precipitation of feet on the stairs. Then there I was, conscious again, rather bewildered but intact, suspended in the air a few inches above that bloody heap on the cobblestones, a taut, transparent string protruding from my belly seemed to be attaching me to it. While Andre knelt weeping beside the broken thing lying amid the shards of the potted sage plants kept by the concierge for her digestive tisanes, my parents' faces appeared in my bedroom window, ghostly through the organdy curtains. I wanted to reassure them that I wasn't hurt, so I dashed towards the door, but the string at my middle pulled me right back to the courtyard. I wanted to tell them it was all a mistake and to please go back to bed. Despite the terrible row I had just had with André about what I should do now that Maudie was dead, I wasn't angry at them anymore. There was no need for them to be so upset, and I was truly sorry for waking everyone up. But the words on my lips produced no sound or effect. Soon enough, my parents withdrew from the window, and my brother went back inside after an agitated consultation with the concierge, who had come shuffling out in her bathrobe. A few moments later, up on the 4th floor, all the windows banged shut. The concierge threw a sheet over my corpse in the courtyard, crossed herself, and began to sweep up the mess I had made, muttering prayers or perhaps blasphemies to herself, for I couldn't really hear properly. An eerie hollowness in my ears drowned out all external sound. I waited for them to come get me as the broom licked about the edges of the sheet, and the concierge's feet in red felt slippers padded up and down. Surely they wouldn't leave me here for long, stretched out on the gravel and dead leaves blown in from the street. Then I thought, who could carry me up those stairs at that ungodly hour? It would take at least 2 men in the condition that I was in, my waters ready to break. My father's back couldn't have withstood the strain. All our neighbors were quite elderly, and André couldn't have handled such a task alone. So I guessed they had decided to wait until morning before trying to move me. The rest of the night passed without event. Unfamiliar constellations gleamed in the gutters before sinking over the edge of the roof. The neighbor's tabby, on a nocturnal prowl, scuttled up to sniff me, but ran off in a frenzy when I reached out to stroke it. Frost bloomed on the cobblestones around the bundle in the courtyard, from which I averted my gaze. Finally, at dawn, Monsieur Leroux, the dustman, making his daily rounds, collected me in his rusty wheelbarrow after a long conversation with the concierge. I say me when perhaps I should say it, or perhaps us. There seemed to be 2 of me now, me and that thing, but I wasn't yet completely convinced as to what or who I was now.
Fabulous. Can you tell us what's next for you?
Well, I've got a couple of projects. One of the projects I'm working on right now is I also wrote, one of my previous novels is about the life of Catherine Mansfield, and especially about her life in France, actually. The last 5 years of her life, she spent a long time in France, and she died in France, actually, in 1922. So I've taken a section of this novel and I've turned it into a radio play, and it's a part that deals with her friendship with Virginia Woolf. And I'm working with this group with a radio podcaster in the UK, and she has a group of young actors, and we are putting together. She's producing this radio play for her podcast, so that's a really exciting thing. And I'm working on another novel. It's a mystery novel set in Italy, and I have written 2 other sort of mystery suspense novels that are set in the same area of the Tuscia, which is the northern corner of the area where Rome is, which bordering with Tuscany in a certain spot, which is very mysterious. It's an Etruscan area and full of myths and legends. And so this one is a mystery story set in the 1920s, but it has to do with mermaids. And so I can't say any more than that.
Fabulous. Okay, so where can we find you if we want to keep up to date with your radio play and your next books and all of that?
Well, my website is lindalappin.net, but also lindalappin.com will take you right to my website. There's information and downloads and links to performances of my stories and lots of stuff.
Fabulous. Well, I'll include all of the links and everything in the show notes so people can find you very easily. And you'll have to send me a message when your radio play is up and running so that I can listen to it.
Oh, yes, that would be lovely.
Thank you so much for joining me today. It was a real pleasure speaking with you.
And thank you. It's been a pleasure for me too.
Thank you again to Linda Lappin for such a lovely conversation. If you follow us on social media, you'll know that Linda generously offered to give away 3 copies of Loving Modigliani to our listeners. So congratulations to the winners. If you're not one of the winners, but your interest has been piqued by this interview, you're in luck. The Kindle ebook version of Loving Modigliani is on sale from now until January 1st, 2022 for only $3.99 on Amazon. Just follow the links in our social media at Paris Underground Radio or in the show notes. And if you're not following us on social media, well, you're missing out. My name is Jennifer Garrity. You can find me on all social media at Jennyphoria. That's JennyPhoria. Storytime in Paris is produced by me as part of the Paris Underground Radio Network. For more on this podcast and podcasts like it, please go to parisundergroundradio.com. Thank you and happy listening.